Welcome, everybody. And Madame Bertrand, we welcome you. We're very, very happy to have you with us. And I just thought I might give us a little introduction. I teach in the Director's Education Program. The first day, I always teach the different kinds of boards. And they are really quite strikingly different. Whether you're dealing with large publicly traded ones, small credit unions, joint ventures, venture capital, family and not-for-profits, and on and on and on. And today, Madame Bertrand, may I call you Françoise?
Yes, please.
Oh, merci, Françoise. Françoise has got a huge amount of experience across quite a broad swath of these kinds of boards. She was the director and CEO of Télé-Québec for 7 years. That's an agency board and commission of the provincial government. She was director and CEO for 5 years of the CRTC, looking after everything from the internet to broadcasting and to competition. She was for 13 years a director and CEO of the Fédération des Chambres de Commerce du Québec, which is a completely different kind of beast to have. And then she's just retired as chair of Via Rail Canada. So all of these experiences coming under sort of provincial and or federal agencies, boards, and commissions. But in addition to that, she's been the director and chair of Quebecor, a large publicly traded company, but controlled, which a huge number of them are in Canada. And Françoise, it's interesting that the performance of controlled corporations in Canada versus uncontrolled significantly greater. And the National Bank, headquartered in Montreal, looks at that every quarter, but I find that fascinating. What just before we move on to the agencies, boards, and commissions, what is it about a family-controlled corporation that allows it to do better in the longer term?
Well, I think it allows, well, thank you for having me first, David. I'm really pleased to be joining your podcast, for which I'm a great attendant usually. The major difference is a clear vision. Very definite. And it allows for not strictly, as we see in other companies, of course, the commercial dimension and the economics of business is still there. But instead of being from term to term, it has a midterm vision and a long-term vision.
Yeah.
And it allows for more investment in that perspective. And it allows for a better success, generally speaking. I'll think of Quebecor. I wasn't on CGI, but that's been the story of the CGI. It's been the one also of Couche-Tard. Those are really examples where that kind of perspective has been very beneficial to the organizations.
Yeah, it's a feature of the Canadian stock market that these family-controlled companies, I think too, because maybe they have a longer time horizon. Instead of being short-term quarterly earnings, they're generational. You know, they want to create something that they're carrying on from the founder and build it for the next generation. I don't know, but it's a wonderful
definitely
feature.
that. And they have a vision. And it was interesting.
Yeah.
Me, who's been involved in communication most of my life, I remember before I joined the CRTC, doing a study on cable companies in North America.
Yeah.
And all those companies were held by families.
Okay.
And they required a lot of investment. Of course, they wanted to keep their monopoly, but they had that perspective of building an heritage, not only for them, but for a future generation.
Yeah, right. Okay. She was also director of a mining company, my favorite entities in gold mining, Cisco. And price of gold is doing pretty well these days, ma'am.
Indeed.
I hope your share options are paying off for you.
Like oil.
Yeah,
Oil is
like oil.
better than
And she's been on about 10 not-for-profit charitable organizations over her lifetime. So an extraordinarily broad horizon of enterprises that she's been and had board experiences on. So, Françoise, could you start us maybe with the agencies that you just left? Via Rail. What is different about a federal crown corporation from Quebecor or Cisco?
Well, while I was at Quebecor, there was one majority owner. Uh, there was a few CEOs, but maybe two that I've known in my 11 years.
Yeah.
But if I recall of the years, I was 8 years at VIA. There were, while I was there, two prime minister of the same political party.
Yeah.
There were five ministers, two deputy minister, and four CEOs.
Wow.
That creates a situation, of course, of always having to verify, assess. Do we still have the same game plan, the same strategy, the same
Right.
vision? I
Yeah.
never asked myself about that in Quebecor. It was clear what Mr. Pelado wanted to achieve with Quebecor, and he is achieving it till today. Of course, circumstances change and you have to adapt, but there is a long-term perspective that is so reassuring for a fiduciary because you know what you signed for when you joined the board,
Mm-hmm.
and you know what are the homeworks and the lessons that you have to learn in order to contribute. It won't change from term to term. And it is somewhat an experience I have from VIA. Of course, we still have to run trains from A to Z, which means from Vancouver to Halifax and Moncton. But in the meantime, many characteristics of our existence change. And it makes it very difficult for the CEO and for the board. Who's the boss?
Yeah.
Is it the deputy minister? Is it the minister? Is it the kind of vision that was sold to you when you accepted to join the board? It seems to me that it creates a lot of, it might create, might I say, incoherence. And you've got to readjust constantly. And when you have a board that has been there for some time, and that's the case of VIA, that means a lot of, and you never talk about that, Professor Beatty, but maybe you should, adaptability.
Ah, okay.
You've got to be aware of what's changing and what is good for the organization and where do you have to, I won't use the word fight back, but kind of discuss.
Yeah. But how important are these agencies, boards, and commissions? How many of them are there, say, in Ottawa at the federal level?
Yes, well, it's very important. Right now, I have my little, there are 45 federal crown corporation in
Wow.
2024. It
Wow.
was created first, and I think it's interesting from that perspective that the first Canadian crown corporation was the Board of Works, established in 1841.
Mm.
That's sometimes before I was born. And it was to create a shipping canal system in the province of Quebec. Uh, After which, in the 20th century, beginning of 20th century, they created Transportation Crown Corporation,
Mm.
CN, and Air Canada, that both were privatized. And the only one from those two that was kept public is VIA, because at the time they split VIA and CN. And after World War II, the Canadian government created providers of loans and financial services for sectors like farming, small business, and exporters. So it represents quite a lot. Collectively, they are equivalent in terms of their revenues to more than 7% of Canada's GDP.
And that's just at the
Larger,
federal, that's just at the federal level.
yeah,
Yeah.
larger than all of Atlantic Canada, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba
Wow.
combined.
Wow.
They have revenues in 2019, which is many years ago, 162 billion, and I've lost at the time 400 million overall, meaning their deficit. We can certainly expect that in 2026, and especially after the pandemic, it grew. Of course, there's a lot of not confusion, but a mixture of policy objectives and commercial objectives given to those corporations. And that's the case of VIA. On one hand, we have to bring the service to all Canadians, and at the same time, not to be too heavy on the need for subsidy from the government.
Yeah. Wow. And I know that Linda Hohol, who was the former recently departed chair of the Institute of Corporate Directors, ran Ed Stelbach's study, I think in 2011, on the agencies, boards, and commissions of Alberta. And her conclusion was, I was astounded, because something in the order of 50% of the goods and services of the Alberta government's delivery come through an agency, a board, or a commission. Astonishingly large presence in the Canadian economy. But tell me, as chair of VIA, do you get, I always call it the sacred task of the board is to hire the CEO. Does that happen? Does that happen in VIA, Madam Chair?
Well, yes, partly. There's no selection committee stricken by the board. It's the government that has the privilege of appointing CEO. The government strikes a committee made of either bureaucrats or people in cabinet that help the chair of the board doing the call for interest, doing the interviews, and eventually appointing, because it's an appointment in cabinet. For that, it means that it has to be referred to the minister, who then turn to refer to the prime minister's office. I would suspect there are many different experiences in different Crown Corporation. Ours at VIA has been a very delicate one. I think we've achieved good choices with the help of the people in different cabinets. But of course, it's the references that cannot be always investigated the way in the private sector we will do. So there's always, in any situation, shadow zones, of course. What's more difficult is the CEO is appointed through the same process as the board members. So who's the boss? Is it its board? Or is it the minister who's appointed him or her? Is it the deputy minister with whom that person is in contact regularly? And if there's not a real understanding or common understanding, it's very difficult to have a clear view and a clear plan in order to fulfill our mission and what is expected. Add to this that if you have a change of minister, change of deputy minister, change of vision, it adds to the complexity, which I've never really experienced in the private sector. Never.
Yeah. So in terms of managing the board, is there any difference for you as a board manager versus, say, your experience at Quebecor?
I'd say no, not really. There's no difference. You have the importance of getting common understanding of what you're trying to achieve. And you have to build consensus when appropriate, making sure that everybody has had a chance to really participate to the decision-taking process. But of course, if your plan that is given by the shareholder is clear, whoops, have we disappeared? Oh, there, you're back. So that makes the role you have around the table for the board easier. You have a plan to which everybody is subscribing. They may have different nuances, bring different ideas, but always you have a clear view. What happens that make complexify the situation is when there are changes in the shareholder, and that has happened.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. But I think it would be difficult in the Crown for you to actually control a CEO, because in a private sector, you look after the hiring, the mentoring, the compensation, the evaluation, and if you need the firing, you control none of those things in the Crown Corp. The Crown Corp
No,
CEO is
you
paid
act,
by the government, not by the board.
no,
Yeah.
you act by influence in Crown
Okay.
Corporation.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, you'll say in the ICD class, we'll say it's a necessity to have a good, close relationship between the chair and the CEO.
Yes.
Well, in the situation of a Crown Corporation, yes, it's still important, but you have also to make sure you have a close relationship with the minister, with the DM, and that we're all on the same agenda. If you're not, then it creates the distortion that can create different problems.
Okay, so if you're thinking about the ministers and the deputy ministers as stakeholders, it's not dissimilar then from a public company that's got a lot of different pressures on it from a lot of different sources.
No, exactly. But in the private sector, if there's a majority owner, it helps a lot because it won't change unless there's an IPO or it's getting sold. But even in a larger context, I was with Transurban, an Australian company. The way it has evolved with the importance of stakeholders, you can develop a common understanding of the situation and to which do you give an importance. Problem in the federal government, at least, but it would be the same. And I'll add something for provincial ones. In the federal government, if you stay the course with the same minister and the same deputy minister, you can develop that relationship, and you will agree to agree, or you will agree on some point to disagree. But if it changes constantly, it really makes it more difficult. The board, in my case, for 8 years, has been mostly the same, and there was a good climate, good entente in between everybody, and the fact that we could work well together helped really the role of the chair, might I say, because otherwise it could be very difficult. I have an experience, because I think that's something Mr. Trudeau had brought, is somewhat of a cut between political appointments and appointments based more on competencies. Of course, it has brought a lot of diversity too around the table of the board. And my observation, including me, I would say still based, yes, on diversity, but based on competencies. My experience in the provincial boards is closer, the board is closer to the reality of a government. And I'd say that there's more dependency on the political ideas, let's say. In the federal, my experience is very distant. And that was the same when I was at the CRTC, which is a different beast altogether because it's a quasi-tribunal. But I never really experienced that we were under some scrutiny of the government, having to go in one direction, having to render decision to please the political arena. Not at all. In provincial, not as distant. Although we all know that Crown Corporation has been created to be at arm's length.
Theoretically, yes.
Theoretically. Well, they call it back anytime they need to call it that.
Yeah. And well, another key, I think, long-term component of a successful board is the so-called skills matrix, where you decide what skill sets you need to supplement the board's current skill sets. Now, do you have an opportunity, let's say in VIA, to take those conclusions into the political arena and make sure that to some extent the politicians are thinking about those skill sets?
Well, on that, yes, I'd say yes. It was much easier in my experience as chair of, was on the selection committee of all the members that sit right now on the VIA board. And there was really a possibility, depending on who did apply altogether, but each time we appointed new members, there were at least 200 interest, 200 people interested. So we tried, of course, to do a distribution between provinces, a bit of French and English, and women, and all this. But that was, I'd say, easy. Maybe today we could have a look that would be different criteria that should be used. But I'd say that at the time where I was involved, there was a lot of space, which is not exactly the same with the idea of the CEO. Although there was a case where I didn't feel there was all the space we would have needed the second time, more so. In the private sector, especially when you have a majority shareholder, the independence of choosing, you need the discussion with the shareholder before you start the process, so that you can really agree on what are the criteria that you will favor and what kind of profile you need. That conversation is not as possible for the same reason. There are too many interveners in the government before you can really get an agreement.
Yeah. I've been on a couple of boards with a controlling shareholder and basically discovered that I needn't be restricted totally to my influence on him or her and the company in the boardroom. But I'm often much more successful in raising a point over a breakfast or a lunch, just in order to make it more casual. So you do have a means of expanding your influence and your questions beyond the boardroom table. Yeah.
Well, that for sure is easier in the private sector than it is in the government. As I say, there are many interveners in the federal government, and they change. So that can keep you busy, very busy.
5 ministers in 8 years. That's
you need absolutely the bridge. You need that common view that will allow you to play full role of a fiduciary. Otherwise, your trial and error. Of course, life is trial and error as well, but there are situations where it's more so.
Okay, we'll go on to the CRTC. Quinn, are there any questions on crowns?
So, question coming in from John Peddle. So, how do you best manage as a chair using the stark contrast from a controlling stakeholder of a public company, but particularly on a crown board when there are all of these different stakeholders, these rotating stakeholders? What is the fundamental difference as a chair?
Well, as a chair, frankly, around the board, my experience has been that there was a very stable board. So once you develop some kind of understanding, you know who has a more business angle, who has a more social angle, and you really know how to manage the discussion, and you know who you should be talking to when there's a very delicate question ahead of the meeting, or after the meeting to
Yeah.
make sure that you keep the group together. In the private sector, that is done very much so with the shareholder himself. The closer you are of him, of his intention, of what he's pursuing, then you become a partner in sharing that view with the different directors. I'll give you an example. It happened to me once where there was a big investment to be made. And there was some reluctance because it meant a depth level. And the way we worked it, working with the shareholder and with the different directors, we said, okay, that seems to be important. Let's do a kind of assessment by a third party who will come. And although we trust the judgment by the executives and the shareholder, we feel that we need some more analysis from a third party to be really comfortable. And that's what we did. So there's a possibility of a dialogue, of a discussion, and always with the same idea for the good of the company. As I say, and obviously we were able to do the same thing in VIA because we got a big investment in VIA to buy a new fleet from for the corridor, which was quite significant. And we got another investment in order to change our fleet that goes to Vancouver and the one that goes to Halifax. So, of course, there are moments and times where we have that kind of beneficial dialogue, but on other front, it's more difficult. I'll kind of give the example. The board that is at VIA right now thought that we would have a high frequency rail. We were working on that. And eventually the government said, no, that won't be a high frequency rail. It has to be so as close as possible as a high speed. And it created Alto, and it's no longer VIA per se that is taking care of that project.
Yeah. But one of the things I remember, I was, Quinn, I'll just bust in here for a second.
Yeah.
I had the good fortune to do an appraisal of the VIA board 5 years ago. And Françoise worked very, very hard at creating what I call the board gel. You know, there are a bunch of individuals who come together 5, 6 times a year. They've never worked with each other before. They really don't know the name of a dog or a cat of anybody. And she regularly, as a matter of practice, had dinners at her home prior to the board meetings and used something that you called a tour de table for a member of the board who was maybe a little quieter than he or she might have been on a certain issue. Françoise would always say, now let's go around the boardroom one by one and just review where we are on this matter, which really brought out those who were a little reluctant to speak, and in some extent suppress those who are a little over exuberant in their speech.
Yeah, you need to do both.
That's right. But she was deemed by her colleagues to be an absolutely outstanding chair. And part of that, I think, is building the team, Françoise, around the boardroom table, right? So you weren't a collection of individuals.
And my experience, it's been more important in the context of Crown Corporation than it's been in the private sector.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in the private sector, being clear what you're after, the shareholders sitting at the table is clear too. That helps a lot. The gel is in itself. If you don't agree with the vision and what we're trying to build, well, you just leave. That's all, you know. So that really helps.
So
okay. Yeah, are there any others, Quinn, on
there
Crown?
are a couple good questions, but I'm going to save them just for the sake of getting to other very interesting topics.
Yeah, I wanted Françoise, if she could, to tell us what was different about the CRTC in your 5 years there, and in terms of its governance. How was the CRTC? Everything. Okay, tell me, how's that?
Well, it's a quasi tribunal. So, and it's an institution that overlooks broadcasting and telecom. The legislations on telecom and broadcast have been somewhat copycat by the Transportation Act. So I always keep in transportation somehow, even if I'm in communication. It was clear when I came, it was in 96, the government had been clear that what they wanted was opening telecom to competition. And secondly, that they were open to convergence, meaning some vertical integration between the telecom companies and the broadcasting undertaking. And that helped a lot to give a common vision. That's what I think is the problem sometimes with the Crown Corporation. If it's not clear, you cannot, you may try to replace your shareholder, but it's difficult. And at one point, you may just be not reminded that you're not the one to decide the vision. So the CRTC, at the time, we were rendering very small decisions and large decisions, but it could be 2,000 decisions a year, tariffs and all kinds. But at the same time, selling of undertaking, opening up and deciding on the model for opening up competition. That was huge process. It's always on a public process. And our decisions were final in a way that they could be challenged only at two places. The party or the licensee was not happy with our decision, could go to the federal court saying the process has not been a due process, or they can go to the cabinet of the Minister of Heritage, the minister by which we were reporting, and I think it's still the same today, to kind of complain that they had been treated unfairly and we had not understood perfectly their point of view. And in 5 years, there was only two decisions that were taken, to one to the federal court and one to the Minister Cops. The federal court turned down the pretension of the licensee. The cabinet on the decision for which there was an appeal, cabinet eventually asked for a review of that decision, but my term was over and I had left.
Okay. Who did you report to, in a sense, as the CEO of the CRTC?
To no one. It was, we were reporting to Parliament through the Minister of Heritage. It may be because of the personality of that minister, but over my term, other than before being appointed, I met the minister 2 times in 5 years.
Wow.
So it's at real arm's length.
Yeah.
But they're 30. I was chair and CEO. Yeah. I had 2 excellent vice chair, one in telecom, David Colville, and one in broadcasting, and André Wiley. And the commissioners had all been appointed from different regions with different experience, but really took their job seriously, worked very hard. And the staff, there were about 425 people, really were very seasoned. And there was not a decision rendered without a public process, sometimes written public process or, hearings. So it's not something I feel like, or we should. It was really a matter of analysis, of experience. And because of that, I suppose the seriousness by which the CRTC had behaved over the years. If I compare with Télé-Québec, where I was for 8 years, or there was really and probably because it's a quasi-judiciary agency, but there was a real distance. Not with the public, because when we did the hearings, oftentimes we went around the country. That's how I had the great privilege of going to the Northwest Territories and Vancouver and Halifax. We were really traveling where the stakeholders were more numerous in terms of impact of decisions.
Yeah. Wow.
Can you just you covered a lot of it, but I find this so fascinating. Commissions and tribunals with their unique what they have dominion over, or just sort of the nature of their governance. Can you just re-describe what makes a commission or tribunal so unique when it comes to governance, and impress upon the audience as the chair what that means for you leading that organization?
Well, I'd say, if you take a check and balance in the Crown Corporation like VIA, the check and balance is really done by the government, the bureaucrats and the political. They're the shareholders, and they're the ones overlooking the fiduciary and the executives and the teams at VIA to make sure we're fulfilling the expectations and the mission we are given. In the CRTC, we become somehow the owners. We are told there are 2 legislations. There are about 13 objectives in each of the legislation, and you have to render decisions that are respectful of those legislation. But as you can imagine, the territory is pretty broad. So there is much more latitude, and you have always there are different kinds of processes, but they're the process. I don't know if there are many of those that are still alive of the tariffs, but at the time, a cable company or a phone company that wanted to raise its rate had to come in front of the commission. Of course, we didn't do a hearing for that. Public hearing was all written. But if you had, for example, CTV that was bought, all those big transactions had to go through a public hearing. So imagine you have the people within the commission, the bureaucrats of the commission, you have the commissioners themselves, and you have the experts who come during the public hearing. It's not only the one that is the proponent of a transaction and the opponents of the transaction. There are many stakeholders who come in front of you to explain what would be the impact. So it's that analysis that creates, of course, the deepness of your analysis. And I hope I'd say most of the time, they are fair decisions. And as my former vice chair telecom used to say, well, if one part of the country is unhappy, let's see if the other part is happy, and then we know we have rendered a fair decision. So my point is, when you do that long process, the check and balance is in the process itself. Because, of course, if you were to render a decision that has no roots, no sense, of course, you'll be eventually challenged in front of either the court or the cabinet, but yourself will not do a long term. So it's very, very different. And you have much more on your shoulders. When I think of the period I was there, we opened the telephony in competition. Jean Monti, who was then the CEO of BCE, didn't want that. He was going from one chamber of commerce to another to say that he opposed, but we did it. And I think it's for the benefit, not only of consumers, which is very important, but for the benefit of innovation, for the benefit of transformation. And when we looked into broadcasting, the same thing, that we've allowed competition in broadcasting, because in the past, only if you had an increase in the market could you consider a new undertaking. Well, we felt at the time that if it was good for telephony to have competition, why not in broadcasting, radio, television? So that was in cable, and that brought a lot of change in how the undertakings were delivering their services, how we have evolved as consumers. So I think the check and balance reside in the public process itself.
Well, when you were working in the Fédération of the Commerce, you must have had 100 different stakeholders, because you had different regions. How big was your board there as the CEO?
Oh, la, la, la. I cannot say, well, I'll say there's an executive committee who was 11 people.
11, yeah, okay.
11 people. And there was a board that did represent all the regions, all kinds of, the small.
Yeah.
The executive committee was mostly the representatives of the corporate entities.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Who were the ones who were providing the means, financial means to the federation. But as I've said always, without the dialogue with the local chambers and the working together with the chambers, even if I was coming to see a minister, a deputy minister, or a parliamentary commission and say, we think, he will say, or she will say, who are you representing? I cannot say I represent only big corporation in Quebec, where if I have local chambers singing the same song, and I provided them with the same elements at their level, we then have a common voice that is much more stronger and that helps influencing government. I cannot say we won on every battle, but certainly that was the way we were able to advance on our agenda. Unless you work together, that's always the ensemble is always the best way to make advancement.
But it's very interesting, isn't it? The number of stakeholders you had to satisfy in that job was extraordinarily large. And one of the things that a lot of public corporations are now running into is all kinds of new stakeholder interests, pressing forward resolutions at annual general meetings and. So in a way, you should learn your trade in the Fédération, because you've got to learn how to deal with all these stakeholders and take that into the private sector and into the Crown Corps.
Well, you've got to consider that, what makes you stronger? What makes you stronger is if you work together.
Yeah.
If I'm very smart and I have a committee and I have a consultant that, do provide a great essay on the topic, it's wonderful. But if I'm by myself with maybe 2 or 3 people in front of the parliamentary committee, I won't do the same mileage. I'll tell you, one day, the PQ government that had come into power had decided that they would do retroactivity on fiscal reality for business. Well, we have been able to bring a big group of local chambers, not the corporation, the local chambers. And because of our coming together, we were able to have the government step back. Together, no, but it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of facts. You cannot just say it's my impression. you've got to be fact-based,
Hmm.
not always scientifically, but certainly fact-based, and make sure that you're very transparent about who are you representing and how serious it is.
Hmm.
And, you know, never cry a wolf, but when there is a wolf, please do.
Quinn, we've got 10 minutes left. You want to just ask a few more questions that came up?
Please, please drop the questions in. I think we've covered a bunch of these, but if anyone who said one earlier, please feel free to put it back in and I can cover it. One thing that we talked about during our prep call was public relations and the public and the accountability to the public. And what are the differences that you've experienced between the Chamber of Commerce, CRTC, Quebecor, in terms of the what David calls Mont Saint Michel, which is the invasion of social media and being able to communicate very quickly in the modern era?
Well, in Quebecor, I left before this was very present, although being on television, being the cable company, being telephone, of course, we had feedback all the time and we were doing lots of surveys. In VIA, social media existed and we had different technical issues and snowstorms and problems with CN, because you know CN and VIA share the same railways and they belong to the CN. And in consequence, we have many delays, and that you can be sure. We have our clientele always reacting, and the minute it's really serious, the media take over, and it's very hard to keep a good reputation. Our way has been to offer an exemplary service on board, and I think in that respect we have succeeded. They have succeeded. I've got to dissociate myself now. But VIA has had many challenges on that front. In Ozisco, I've experienced that before I joined the board, where there was a possibility of creating an open mine on the former site. And the company had been very generous in relocalizing the citizens and organizing a community life by creating infrastructure. And yet some citizens were adamant not to agree with that and not to accept a new mine in their city. And of course, the media took over. Mostly people from Montreal who had never been to Abitibi, but had a very deep sense. So it's very aléatoire. What the public relation has to be constant. You cannot say, I have a problem, I will go and see those stakeholders. You've got to be aware what's your mapping of your stakeholders and make sure that you establish a certain continuity, that you are aware of decisions you take might have an impact, and the more you go upfront rather than after the upstream rather than after the fact, it's always better. That doesn't mean you won't have any problems, but it certainly helps. And there's something I want to say that I haven't talked about. You know, David, you talked about the tour de table that I do all the time. I used to do that too when I was a CEO. It's something I've learned when I've started my life in management at University of Quebec in Montreal, because that university is what you say, co-manage. In a given forum, there's always more unionized people than executives. So unless you do tour de table, unless you learn to talk to the different people, you never get to a common decision. So it takes a lot of time, but it's an investment. It's not time spent, it's time invested.
Yeah,
and you learn so much, not only what you bring to them in order to help their opinion to evolve, but also they bring information to you that makes your opinion more sounded, more valid, and can do more at the end in terms of benefit to the organization.
Great.
The thing David has said is being socially savvy is a critical part about being a board director. And from what I've heard you talk about today, whether it's a controlling shareholder or diverse stakeholder organization, understanding the structure that you are working within is how you become socially savvy.
Absolutely. And the more you have a diversified board, it helps. If you all come from the same tower, the same street, of course, you don't have eyes and ears that allows you to get a pulse of where people are. If you have a few variants into your board, that helps to say, oh, are you aware? Oh, no, I wasn't. Of course, AI will help because you can pulse through AI lots of things. But if it is people who have roots elsewhere, it's even better, I'd say.
I'm going to be, so we're going to try to get really close to the hour. I have 3 rapid fire questions for you. So if you could indulge us with some quick answers, I think they'll be great. Sure. From David Robillard here. How do you handle the politics of offboarding underperforming board members in terms of what I imagine being the different structures that you've worked in?
Okay, I'll take that for all boards. You can ask somebody to remove them. No, I think you have every year, either with an external consultant or yourself in between the external consultant, have that conversation with each of your members. And without asking for a delation yet, what's the perspective, the perception? And it has happened to me that I've asked a couple of people, either in the private sector or the public sector, that because of this or that, I thought it'd be best for them and for the good of the business if they would allow the space to be taken by somebody else. It's delicate, but it's like when you have an executive and you have to say, you're wonderful, but you may not be the right person at this point in time. It takes courage, but it takes regular evaluation. You cannot say, this morning, I don't feel like you can be helpful. You've got to have that constant relationship that allows. Example, someone that misses too many board meetings or shows up at the board meeting, doesn't come to the committees, it's a sign that the commitment is not what is expected. So I'd say it's difficult, but it's got to be done.
Next, so two more quick ones. So from Joanne here, I'm going to make it, what are some examples of board failures in terms of governance and decision making that you've seen? Maybe make this more about what are the mistakes that you've seen directors make that people should be aware of?
Thinking they know when they don't. Not going, you arrive to a board. You have experience as an executive, as a board member. You don't have the experience of that specific organization. Take the time to learn. Talk to people in the organization, visit the locations. You'll never become an expert, but at least there'll be some resonance with the people there. When I see, what I've seen is mistakes have been mostly, I haven't seen that many, especially when I'm chair, but what I've seen is thinking because of a long experience, we can teach before learning. And that's a problem, I think.
Teach before learning. Last question from Kelly Muramitz. What do you think are the implications of being a woman on a board versus being a man?
Kelly.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you for your question, because I hesitated today and I thought that David would be gracious enough to remind us that yesterday was the day of the rights of women.
Yeah, that's right.
Because frankly, that's one difference I make. In the Crown Corporation, there has been, in the late years, really the concern of appointing diversity of all kinds, among which much more women. When I was first appointed at VIA, there was half women, half men, and competent women, may I say. The difference in the early years, when I was a young woman, was, of course, you learn to learn before talking. Because, of course, it takes some self-confidence in order to dare. Maybe some men should learn that too, but let's say that for women, it's more natural but it's true that the first time you ask a question or the first time you formulate an opinion or an idea, it is more challenging. But the more you do it, as I say, the worst that can happen, you'll be on the springboard and you'll fall in the water. You won't hurt yourself. So that's the only difference I see. Because today, and you look at university, even in engineering school, we're almost at 40% inscriptions of women. So there is not the difference we used to have between the competencies. There was at one point the difference that women have not been CEOs. That's no longer true. They're CEOs, there's executive vice president, they have board experiences. So I think that gap is still there. I won't pretend that it's equal, but if you go on the facts, this gap is really narrowing. Is the perception of that gap still very wide for some men? Yes. Some men think that in general, men have more experience, but they'll be taught. We'll show them.
Oh, I muted you, David. I'm David.
That may be good. Maybe it's good that you mute.
No, that's fine. Françoise Bertrand, thank you so very much. I teach in my classes that without a good chair, you cannot be a value-added director. And we would all have been blessed to have worked under your chairmanship. So, chairship. No, there's a word. Is that right? Or chair?
Chairperson.
Chairperson. Okay, yeah.
Chairperson.
Thank you. But thank you very much.
Had you been on my chair, on my board, you would have been invited for dinner at my place, and I cook. You forgot to mention that.
Okay.
I'm the cook.
All right. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, David, for your invitation. Thank you, Quinn.
Really quick commercial for next event. Thank you, Françoise. Thank you, International Women's Day. Thank you for the trailblazing. The goal of this series is to shrink the time and space to make us all inspired to be better governance leaders, better directors, and what better time than to do that. In the same way, there's still a gap with women being equivalent to men in the workspace, there's still a gap between what the potential of governance can be as well. Thank you, everyone, and do send feedback, and very grateful for your participation.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.